This is a wisdom story, and so it's not just for Yuggans. I think we would agree we all could use some wisdom. So I am hoping that you all will participate in this story as well, if you would like to. And I will not make you sit on the carpet, but when that moment comes, I'll let you know. Okay, so are you guys ready?
Yes.
Who has heard the word ecotone? Any of you ever heard the word? Even a lot of adults say no, too. No, nobody's heard of ecotone? Any guesses? Any guesses? Well, I will tell you what an ecotone is. It's the space between two different areas in nature. For example, one area might be soggy and wet. The other might be really dry. One may be warm. The other may be cooler. They're close together. One may be sunny. The other one might be shady. We have a few ecotones right here in Florida where we live. And let's look at a few pictures of them now. Okay. What is that? Can anybody tell me? Yes, Emma? Mm-hmm. Yes. Do you know what kind of ecotone that's called? It has a name. It's called a tide pool. And just as you pointed out to us, you were right. There are places on the beach where they're up against the rocks, so the ocean and the land are coming together. And there are animals that can't live on the land, and they can't live in the ocean, but they can live in the tide pool. So that ecotone is their special place. An ecotone also can bridge the gap between a forest and a field, a shadowy place and a really sunny place. Here in Florida, we have a special ecotone called the Pinelands. And there we can find beautiful flowers and magical insects. Oh, isn't that a beautiful flower? It's a white orchid. And if you look really closely at it, you will see a magical insect, a little spider. Has anybody here ever seen a lotus? Well, I'm going to tell you a story. Have any of you ever seen a lotus? It's a beautiful flower. I'm going to tell you a story today about the lotus. And we're going to actually become lotuses ourselves for a little while. This is where you adults may come in a minute. Okay, who can tell me, you guys can come look at it, who can tell me what that is in that bowl? Dirt. Well, it's a kind of dirt. What kind? Mud. Yes, very good. Mud is dirt and water, right? So, what's mud? What did we just talk about? An ecotone is places where some things are wet and some are dry. That mud is an ecotone. And there are some plants that can only grow in an ecotone just like that. And what do you think one of those plants is that I just mentioned? Lotus. It's a beautiful plant. And it is a flower that grows in the mud, not in the dirt. The deeper and thicker the mud, guess what happens? The prettier the lotus is when it blooms. There it is. We're going to see the lotus growing like that. See, its roots are in the mud, and then it's blooming. It starts in the mud and uses the mud's nutrients to send up a sprout into the water. And then it uses that nutrients in the water to keep growing until it blooms on the surface, where it nourishes itself with sun and air. So maybe the lotus and its friends have something to teach us, because just like the lotus, what do we need? What do we need, just like the lotus? Yeah, we need things, dirt and water and air and a lot of things to help us grow. So we are going to all try now to see what it feels like to be the lotus. You ready? Each one of us is going to take one of these. What do you think these are? They're seeds. That's right. So we're going to say that they're lotus seeds. Everybody's going to get a seed. You're an adult. Pretend that you have a seed in your hand right now. So you ready? You don't like that one? You want a different one? What about this one? This one's blue. Is that better? You want one like that? You want a different one too? Yeah, these are the mushy. There you go. How's that? Is that better? Okay, good. So you're going to be a lotus now. Take that seed and hold it close to your chest. Pretend, adults, you're holding that seed. You can close your eyes if you want. Feel yourself that you are a lotus seed now. Okay, you guys imagining it break a little? It's trying to get out. You are curled up, and think of you being in a hard shell. And what are you in? You're in that warm, soft mud. It's dark inside the mud, right? You can't see anything. You can put it in the mud if you want, or you can hold it. You don't know what's happening to you. You're sleeping. So if you were in the dark, do you want to use this to cover your head, and it'll make you feel like you're under the mud? If you want to, you can. You can cover your head up. I'm going to. I'm going to cover myself up. If you don't want to do it personally, just pretend you're covered up and in the dark. Here's a poem that will make you feel what the lotus feels. Do you want to tell it to cover up? Thanks. Imagine you're a seed sleeping snug in the mud. Deep within you hides a special little bud. You might be small, but have a big job to do. The job of becoming uniquely you. Just one of the many in the bed of the lake, each a flower seed to blossom once awake. Okay, folks, suddenly you feel different. Amy and Allie, do you feel that you're growing? Do you feel that you're growing? Start pushing. You're ready to bloom. Pushing through the soil isn't much fun, but you keep on striving to the cheerful sun. Squirming and worming, you're heading the right way. Nurtured by water helps you grow each day. Okay, is everybody pushed up? Is everybody grown? All right, all can't wait to meet the bursting bud, majestically rising out of the mud. Let's rise out of the mud, okay? It's finally time to set your petals free. Let's be petals. Uniquely You is here for everyone to see. Look at how beautiful you look, my lotus flowers, all of you. Awesome blossoms. Here are flowers for you. Oops. Yeah, let me make sure you don't trip on the mud there. Let us sing the children now off to class, and thank you all for participating. We love you and bless you and sing your wondrous name. We love you and bless you today, every day.
The lotus flower is a beautiful flower that can be found all over the world. But the start of this flower's life is not as beautiful as one might imagine. It's unlike many other flowers. When the lotus first begins to sprout, it is underwater, making its home in lakes and ponds in areas where the water remains fairly still on the surface. But underneath the surface, the lotus is surrounded by mud and muck and by fish, by insects, and simply dirty, rough conditions. Despite these conditions, the lotus flower maintains strength and pushes aside each of these dirty obstacles as it makes its way to clearer surfaces. At this time, the lotus is still just a stem with only a few leaves and a small flower pod. But in time, the stem continues to grow and the pod slowly surfaces above the water into the clean air, finally freeing itself from the harsh life conditions below. It is then that the lotus slowly opens each beautiful petal to the sun, basking in the worldly beauty surrounding it. The lotus flower is ready to take on the world, Despite being born into dark, murky conditions, where hope for such beautiful life seems dubious, the lotus grows and rises above adversity. Ironically, this same dirty water washes it clean as it surfaces. As the lotus opens each petal to the air, not a stain or spot of mud remains externally. The inner lotus, too, has never seen a drop of mud or dirty water. It is pure and bright and beautiful. In Buddhism, the bud of the lotus symbolizes potential. The lotus flower represents an awakening, spiritual growth, and enlightenment. Just as the lotus flower emerges from the water clean, the lotus also represents purity of body, speech, and mind. The lotus could be thought of as an awakened mind, which grows naturally toward the warmth and light of truth, love, and compassion. The lotus may appear fragile on the surface, but it is flexible and strong, securely anchored under the surface of the water. You don't need to be a Buddhist to understand that we are all like the lotus flower. Many of us live in that murky water and never make it to the surface so we can blossom. Many of us are closed. We are just buds, ready and eager to feel the sunshine of life on our skin. No matter which stages of life you're in, I'm sure you can relate to this lotus and see yourself in this story. The conditions that produce beautiful life are not always ideal, but that never stops the lotus from rising through adversity, opening its petals, and blossoming in the sun. I found that story by Nina at withinanopenheart.org, and it inspired the service and the message I want to share today. As many of you know, I have been attending the Women's Spirit event at the mountain for a few years now. When I attended my first Women's Spirit in the fall of 2016, I was desperate, hopeless, anxious, and depressed. Being with strong women in nature was so healing. The energy and support I received there enabled me to make it through the challenges that came next. So I kept going every spring and every fall. Because of the love and support that I have received from those women and my covenant group and my River of Grass family, I made it through the storm. At the Women's Spirit event this spring, a workshop was being offered on processing grief. I was excited to sign up, feeling ready to look back, process my losses, and prepare for my future. The leader of the workshop, Joanne Zerdy, introduced us to ecotones. Thanks to Diane and our kids, we now understand the role it plays in our environment. It's where biodiversity can thrive that cannot even exist in either of the two environments that it borders. A place where something new can live. The title of the workshop was Mapping Grief. So we learned how to be cartographers of our own losses, to discover what had been created in this space between the light of our hopeful dreams and the shadow of the reality of our loss. Grief is often so hard to navigate, even when you have others who love and support you. Joanne was going to teach us how to create an actual map to help us find a path back to hope. For some, it was the loss of a relationship or the loss of health. For others, it was the death of a loved one. Sometimes it is the loss of a dream due to circumstances beyond our control. Creating a map requires discovering what is here, physically, mentally, spiritually. It requires looking around, having a different perspective, from far away, up above, or from a much later time. When I was in my deepest despair, I was unable to perceive any good in the shadows, and I certainly wasn't looking for an ecotone. It took time. This spring, I was finally able to begin to find the unique biodiversity that exists between the loss of my dreams for my daughter and the reality of her mental illness. That is the map I chose to create in Joanne's workshop. On one side, I listed the expectations I had for my daughter when we adopted her 10 years ago. Happy, thriving, successful. On the other side, I listed the facts that we had to face. She is detached, despairing, and mentally ill. In the middle, the ecotone, the space between light and dark, where things can grow that cannot grow either in full light or full shadow, I listed the beautiful and rare attributes that my daughter has because of her past and her trauma. She is helpful, kind, talented, funny, brilliant, unique, and adept at anything she puts her hand to. On the line dividing the dream and the loss is a quote from the song we just sang. Everything you go through grows you. At the bottom is a lotus growing in the mud of this ecotone. This was an emotionally intense and powerful exercise that shifted my perspective and enabled me to see hope for the future. If the idea of mapping your grief to discover an ecotone and what can grow in that space is of interest to you, there is information at the end of your order of service. Sometimes we can clearly see a beautiful ecotone when the loss is in the very distant past. When my older sister Heather was born in 1961, she was healthy and perfect. When she was 6 months old, she developed encephalitis and needed to be resuscitated after dying in the hospital. This caused extreme brain damage. My mother was devastated. This is a picture of my beautiful sister at about 3 years old. You may notice that the light in her eyes is not there. 18 years after my mother lost the dream of her first child, she enrolled in college, became a special education teacher, and then worked as an early intervention specialist. Her job was to go into the homes of families whose infants had been diagnosed with special needs. If not for my mom's experience with my sister, she never would have chosen the field of special education. And if she had, she would not have been as gifted. She was able to walk into the homes of those families, truly know the pain that these parents were feeling, and help them to navigate this new reality. The DesRochers were one of those families. Their daughter, Michelle, was born with Down syndrome. Their dreams were shattered. They did not know how to deal with a bunch of young therapists coming into their home who had little experience and no ability to empathize. My mom was more mature and had walked in their shoes. She made a difference in the life of this family. She gave them hope and tools to help their daughter achieve her full potential. About 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Michelle, a beautiful young woman who was attending college, working, and had even performed the national anthem in sign language for local sports games. There she is at work. Today, Michelle is engaged and planning a life no one ever believed she could have. This is only one of the hundreds of families that my mother's gift touched, because she lived and blossomed in the ecotone created by the loss of her own child. Most of you remember when I broke my ankle in Puerto Rico in February. Lovely. Many people expressed how terrible it was. I disagree. I believe that it was my lotus from the mud. Or, as they might say in Puerto Rico, loto de lodo. I literally broke my ankle from getting my foot stuck in the mud. I was in the backyard of the house that the Full Moon Daughters rented for some glamorous camping. The house we rented is located in the rainforest called El Yunque, high in the mountains. This is the view from the house and the yard where I fell. Most of our sisters had gone hiking in El Yunque that morning. It was just 3 of us relaxing when we heard the snap. Amy and Brooke waited with me for 2.5 hours until the ambulance arrived, bringing me ice and keeping me company. I even enjoyed a private Amy Carroll Webb concert while sitting in the mud. Linda had been hiking with the others when she heard, so she drove an hour back to the house. Once I was loaded up in the ambulance, she drove another 1.5 hours to meet us at the hospital. She stayed with me and made sure I was well cared for. It turned out there were no orthopedics at that hospital, and I would have to wait until Tuesday to to see a doctor in San Juan. It was a Saturday night on a holiday weekend. They also told me I would not be able to fly until I had surgery and healed. About an 8-week stay in Puerto Rico. Yikes. So Linda drove me to her parents' home in San Juan, an hour away. They were so kind and generous to take in a stranger for 3 nights. This is me wearing Linda's mom's pajamas when I was visited by my full moon sisters the day after the accident. I am holding the coquille my sisters bought for me. They knew how much I loved this special little frog of Puerto Rico. And that's why I love him. While I waited to go to the doctor, I had to figure out how I was going to survive alone after surgery. Diana Tull came to the rescue and volunteered to stay with me for 8 weeks. We planned to turn it into a grand adventure. As we all know, life can change on a dime. On Tuesday, Linda drove me to the doctor, who cleared me to fly, woohoo! And I made it to the airport in time to board the plane home with my 14 sisters. Here we are at the airport. Upon arrival here, I stayed with Cheryl and Tony for 3 nights until I could get to a doctor so I could navigate at home. The story continues with so much love, support, and caring from my friends and church family. I could go on for hours, but I won't. Since I've been a member here, I've had 4 surgeries. Each time help was offered, and each time I declined. This time, I had no choice. So what grew an ecotone between a dream vacation and a broken ankle? I was blessed to learn how to give up control, how to graciously accept help, and given the gift of developing deeper relationships with so many members of my River of Grass family. Yes, I literally got stuck in the mud. I also saw the opportunity to cultivate the seeds that were planted. This experience enabled the beautiful lotus of the mud to bloom in my life. These words by the wonderful Goldie Hawn stated beautifully. The lotus is the most beautiful flower whose petals open one by one, but it will only grow in the mud. In order to grow and gain wisdom, first, you must have the mud, the obstacles of life and its suffering. The mud speaks of the common ground that humans share, no matter what our stations in life. Whether we have it all or we have nothing, we are all faced with the same obstacles: sadness, loss, illness, dying, and death. If we are to strive as human beings to gain more wisdom, more kindness, and more compassion, we must have the intention to grow as a lotus and open each petal one by one. Let's face it, mud is made up of poop, and we often end up stepping in it as we journey through life. Consider these questions for yourself. What can that poop fertilize? What can grow in that ecotone between the light and the shadow? How can we find peace and even joy in the space between our dreams and our loss? Remember, not only does mud nourish, it also pulls out toxins to enable healing. Ecotones are where new possibilities for balance, healing, and transformation can grow. I know that many of us here have faced the grief of various losses and have had to navigate our way through the healing. I also know there are many more of you whose losses I am unaware of. Today, I bring you this message of hope and offer a way to find a new perspective to help us experience the mud in the middle in a new way.